Thank you all for supporting our Peacemakers Circle format. We try to do this once a week and kind of move around the circle of the various topical areas that are of interest to us as Zen Peacemakers. And I want to very heartily thank and welcome David Hinton. It's a real honor to have David be with us today. As we were in the waiting room, I referred to David as a scholar, and he brushed me off. So I won't do that again. But David is certainly prolific in terms of writing and publishing. 2 handfuls, 3 handfuls, 4 handfuls of books, translations, poetry, the classics, and his most recent book that he's going to be talking about today is a new translation of the Blue Cliff Record. And in a minute here, I'm going to ask David to tell us what that is. Japanese Hekigan Roku, I think is how we call it in Japanese. And the classic collection of 100 koans. I've been reading a pre-pressed digital copy of it, and I really encourage people to get this book and read it. Definitely, for the new translation that is we want to talk about today. But I was telling David, the introduction is just extraordinary, and then there are some reference materials in the final pages in the index, various tables that are really, really helpful with Chinese names in Wade Giles and in Pinyin, and then English translations of the Chinese names of some of the, of the contributors to the Blue Cliff Record, which I'd never seen before. And I'm sure it's somewhere, but I'd never seen it laid out that way. So you didn't come to listen to me. But I do want to say one thing as I introduce David. This is such a, this is from his introduction, and I just find it extraordinary. It's the last paragraph. It's in the last paragraph of his introduction, and he says, "And that answer is the sheer thusness of things, wordless and inexplicable. No answer at all, returning you to those empty absence mind depths. It could be a Chan master's antics, or just as easily the householder answering your knock at the gate. In Chan, the gate is always the entranceway to awakening, and here it is clear that any gate will do." I love that. Any gate will do. There are no special gates. "And turning away from that house after your knock has been answered, you set out into the wind-scoured and moonlit expanses of all heaven and earth, the mirror deep depths of sight, opening those expanses of thusness inside of you, lighting that radiant lamp. And in the midst of all those depths, what is there to enlighten?" That's lovely. It's spot on. It's poetic, and I just love it. And I've got that highlighted in my digital copy here. So, at any rate, I'm going to welcome David. Thank you once again. And David, maybe you can just say a few words, and then I've got a question for you to get us started.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry you didn't get an actual physical copy of the book. For opening statement, I think I'm going to just read the first paragraph of the introduction, which is the stuff you just heard sort of is circling back around to this first paragraph. There are no answers, only depths. If there were an anthem for the Blue Cliff Record and Chan more broadly, this might be it. There are no answers, only depths. But the depths, oh my, the depths are wondrous indeed. For those depths are beyond the words and explanations and understanding that answers normally entail. And there, anything and anywhere is the answer. Willow seed fluffs swarming sunlit through afternoon skies. Hummingbird probing blue-violet iris blossoms, veined gold. Someone answering a knock at the courtyard gate. And then this is a poem that is considered the preface to the Blue Cliff Record. And here you'll hear some of the things that you heard earlier. Boundless wind and moon are the eye within the eye. Limitless heaven and earth, the lamp beyond the lamp. A million homes amid dark willows and lit blossoms. Knock at any gate anywhere, and someone will answer.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you, David. What I'd like to do here at the outset is start from the assumption that not necessarily everyone is familiar with the Blue Cliff Record. We have a lot of Zen people here. We may have people from other traditions or other practices. Even within the Zen community, not everyone undertakes the koan curriculum. So I want to ask David to help us kind of level set a little bit, so we start from a common understanding of, David, what is the Blue Cliff Record? Who wrote it? When did this happen? How is it used as a practice tool? Things like that. If you can just give us a bit of a foundation.
Okay, well, that could take the rest of our hour. Let's see. God, I don't remember the date.
1012?
That sounds right. 1040.
1040.
So the Blue Cliff Record. So first, I use the word Chan, and some of you might not know that that's the Chinese pronunciation of the. So Zen started in China, was completely invented in China, and had been around for maybe half a century, and then it was, the Japanese sent like a whole bunch of cultural people to China to sort of pick up Chinese culture and bring it back to Japan, because for the Japanese, China was this grand classical tradition. So they brought the poetry, painting, calligraphy, and Chan, and the language. They adopted the Chinese language as their own. So there's an ideogram that in Chinese is pronounced Chan, and then when it goes to China, they started pronouncing everything in their own way. So that ideogram was pronounced Zen. So Zen is just the Japanese pronunciation of Chan. So I always use Chan because one of the things I'm really trying to do is get us back to the original Chan that seems to have gotten lost in the trend in the migration to Japan and then on to America. So anyway, that's why I use Chan. So the Blue Cliff Record so Chan really begins in China around 400 CE, and that's like 500 or 600 years before the Blue Cliff Record. And so Chan evolves for those that half century. And eventually they came up with, without going through everything that happened in that half century, eventually they came up with the idea of, Chan always was about paradox, and often the Zen masters were doing paradoxical things, trying to push people past sort of linear thinking, or trying to, I always say, dismantle or deconstruct the structures of consciousness. And one of those is just surprising antics, strange actions, paradoxical sayings. You all know this. So those kind of crystallized in the idea, and this is in the Song dynasty around 900 or 1000, in the idea of little stories, of taking those little stories and sort of collecting them into collections of stories. And the Blue Cliff Record is the first one, that the first of the three classics. There are three classic koan collections. So those little stories are what you know as koans. I call them sangha cases because I don't use Japanese words. I guess I can explain sangha cases in a second. Okay, so they assembled them, and the Blue Cliff Record is the first major one that was really used and became a classic. So the Blue Cliff Record has 100 of those little stories, and for each story, it has the author of the Blue Cliff Record wrote a little poem, which we can think of as a commentary, as it's often spoken of, but it's not really a commentary in the sense it's not explication. In a sense, it builds on or riffs on or pushes to another level the original story, the original Sangha case story. So that's one of the things I think is important and is lost about the Blue Cliff Record and all three of the Sangha case collections. I've done the other two Sangha case collections are one that you all know is the Book of Serenity, which is a mistranslation. It should be the Carefree Ease record. So I have that. I translated that, and it's coming out next year. And then the other one is one that is the most commonly used, is the No Gate Gateway, or you see it as all variations of that, like Gateless Barrier and things like that. That's been translated a lot. I translated that, and it came out a few years ago. So one of the things that I really want to emphasize about all three of these books is that there aren't just collections of Sangha case stories, little strange Zen stories for Zen teachers to use in teaching. That's what they came to be used that way. But originally they were really pieces of literature, and the authors were literary authors like other literary authors, like poets or whatever. And they were building these books to have an immediate literary impact. You don't need a teacher to deal with these things. You just need to know nothing more than I put in this book. That is, you need to know the conceptual framework around it, and then you just need to encounter it directly. And that's really what Chan was about, this direct encounter with a teacher or with reality around you, rivers and mountains, or a garden, whatever it is. So one of the strange things about the Blue Cliff Record is that, and those of you who know it will be surprised to see how short mine is, because I only translate the primary text, that is the original story and the original poem written by Snowshoot Mountain, the author. Then 100 years later, there was this massive commentary added to it that's often translated as part of the Blue Cliff Record. So if you all have seen the Cleary translation, it includes that, and it's like a 900-page book. But again, that commentary is all secondary explication, which in a sense undermines the whole Zen project, the whole Chan project of immediacy, awakening outside of words and texts, etc. So that's the Blue Cliff Record, I guess. It comes at pretty much at the end of the kind of high tradition of Chan. and so, like I said, it's 1040, and the No Gate Gateway is 100 years after that, so in the 1100s. And that's pretty much the end of Chan's sort of innovative transformations. Then I just operated as the assumed conceptual framework for all Chinese intellectuals, poets, painters, calligraphers. And it was, as I said, exported to Japan. And then it started changing in Japan. I guess that's it. Unless there are questions about something.
Yeah, David, we can break this up a little bit too. We've got almost 40 people here too. So everyone, I think, knows how. I can't see everybody, but I think everyone knows how to use your electronic hand. If you go down under React, you can raise your electronic hand. If somebody has a question at this point, maybe rather than saving them all until the end, we can break it up a little bit and then go back in. Feel free. We're all friends here. We're harmless. There we go. I saw one go up. Margaret, thank you. You need to unmute yourself, Margaret.
Okay. David, thank you for your work. Could you just say again, you said you translated the original story with the poem. That's all you translated, not the other commentaries that have grown up.
Yeah.
Over the
Yeah, well, they didn't grow up. All the commentaries were all by one person about 100 years after the original text was. See, the original, what I translated, the original text by Snowshoe Mountain, that was used for 100 years, and then a teacher took it and started using it as a teaching tool, kind of like people do now, and built this big commentary. And I think his students wrote all the commentaries down. And it's kind of a crazy story because and then that started being circulated. That was printed. And then another 50 or 100 years later, I think his student, the student of this person who wrote the massive commentaries, which dwarf the original text, they're huge. That student said, this commentary is the antithesis of what Chan is about. Chan is about encountering, Chan insight directly. So he actually burned all the woodblock printing, the printing blocks, gathered all the printed editions and burned them all. So he destroyed the whole commentary as a kind of massive and Chan teaching. It's like, don't listen, we don't need all this explication. We don't need all these words. It's just the immediate experience. And then, sorry, some years after that, people somehow rebuilt those commentaries, and they did start circulating. People want the crutches of commentaries and language and explanation. So anyway, yeah. So my book is 200 pages long, 100 pages of 100 song cases and 100 of the little poems that go with them.
And you're saying we don't need, often you hear in order to work with koans, we need a teacher, but you seem to be saying no.
I don't think so. You just need to know the framework, and that I describe in one of the appendixes that has the key terms. So there's this sort of philosophical, cosmological, ontological framework. And once you understand that, then you can, and you've read a little bit of stuff, like I wrote a book called China Root that describes that whole framework in quite a bit of detail. Like if you read China Root, you should be able to deal with the Blue Cliff Record. Like I said, it was written as a literary text, not just as a collection of stories for teachers to use. And actually one of, every all three of the Sangha case collections, each one has an author, and each author has his own interests, his own the things he wants to say or do. And the Blue Cliff Record, one of them that you hear over and over and over and over is, you don't need teachers. Get rid of your teachers. It's only when you get rid of teachers that you're going to get anywhere. So that's a constant refrain in this book too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret, for your question. Thanks so much. Conchi, I see you have your hand up. Hi.
Yes, thank you so much. So David, I heard you speak a couple of weeks ago also. Where was that? I guess it was, it doesn't matter. I think it was the San Francisco Zen
San
Center.
Francisco Zen, yeah, I did
Yeah.
that.
Well, first of all, I just have to say I love all your work, and
Thank you.
I've only been studying Zen for like 5 years. I mean, I did Tibetan before that, so I'm not a new Buddhist. But one thing, I'm working with like a group of Zen women Buddhists right now, and we're looking at the sacred feminine, and we're thinking about patriarchal structures in Buddhism.
Yeah.
And I am just so psyched about what you're saying, because one of the things, well, I'm also an English teacher. I'm a high school English teacher. I'm in my room right now. I'm at lunch, so
you can see your
okay.
whiteboard behind you. I was wondering what that was.
But here's the deal, like I never would give my students a novel or a poem or a short story and then tell them what it says. I think that is so crazy, and that would be so authoritarian on my part. So what I'm wondering is, how is Buddhism, why is it developed this way? I just did a training around Bodhidharma, and the same thing happened. Like someone was trying to tell me what Bodhidharma is saying, and I'm like, I don't need you to tell me what Bodhidharma is saying. I have an intellect. I have an imagination. I can interact with the text. And so I just think what you're saying is just so important. Also, I do a lot of astrology, and we're moving from the realm of Pluto and Capricorn, which is old systems, old ways of doing things, into Pluto and Aquarius. And the actual move will happen in the next 2 months here. And so I think that it's really important for us to be talking about new structures, new paradigms, new ways of teaching, new ways of working with the Dharma. And I think you're just really, your piece just came out and flowered right when we need it. So that's what I would say. And I don't know if you have anything else to say about it, but I really think we diminish the intellect and the creativity of our own Buddhist practitioners when we insist on telling them that they have to have a translation.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, I agree. I mean, to start back at the beginning, I hate it that all of these old, I mean, Chan the whole tradition is male. I hate that. But the things I do like about it, it's built on Taoism. It's just an extension of Taoism. And Tao is spoken of at the very core of everything is the idea that the cosmos is this generative tissue. That is, it's female. So Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says over and over, it's female, it's the mother, it's the dark female enigma and things like that. So this thing at the core of it, it's built around and honoring the female, not to reduce women to just wombs. It's only women participate in this larger female nature of things. First, and then the second thing I love about Zen, because I'm pretty independent, I've never really had a teacher, I don't think, of any kind. And that is, it's like, it's male, but it's, in a sense, it's not at core Zen. I talk about core Chan, where the actual awakening happens, where actual teaching happens, as opposed to institutional Chan. Institutional Chan was male, hierarchical, and full of all that explication because teachers need something to do, right? In a way, it's power over a group of people. But core Chan is all about, burning that down. It's all about independence, and you just hear over and over and over and over and over in the old Chan teachers, you need to do this for yourself. The more you listen to teachers, the less you'll get anywhere. So especially for women, that's liberating. I mean, okay, yes, these were male teachers and they do have something to teach you, but what you really want to do is deconstruct them. What you really want to do is get free of them. And that's what they're telling you to do. They're not telling you just, follow me around forever. They're saying, stop listening to me, listen just long enough until you get this and then stop. And then you're on your own and then you're free. It's all about, and like I said, the Blue Cliff Record, this is the refrain. It goes through everything. And in a sense, you see, there are thousands of stories and Snowshoe Mountain chose 100 of them. And a lot of those 100 he chose turn on the idea of killing your teacher one way or another. They turn on the idea. Very often you read this in one of the stories, and it sounds like there's this teacher, a Chan master, but by the time you get to the little story, it's not clear at all who in that story had the insight. Because the teacher is usually getting undermined, often by the students, often by another teacher. And then Snowshoe Mountain's little poem comes, and it almost always ridicules the teacher in the story and deconstructs that person. And then it encourages you as the reader coming along as the third level to deconstruct him and get rid of him. So it's like 3 levels of deconstruction and dismantling of authority, of conceptual structures, of certainty, of answers. And very often the subject of this demolition strategy is the idea of Buddhism. So Chan is most essentially anti-Buddhism. Buddhism really functions in Chan as something, as an intellectual structure that some students came to back in those days. A lot of people who landed in Chan monasteries or became Chan students in any way may have begun in some other more traditional kind of Buddhist training. So one of the things you see Chan teachers doing is trying to dismantle that Buddhist teaching. But then, they'll also dismantle their own teaching. They'll dismantle Taoist teaching, which is the core of Chan, is Taoism. So nothing is sacred. Not the teachers, not Chan, not Taoism, not Buddhism. The point is dismantle, this deconstruction.
Anchi, thank you for your question and wonderful answer, David, as well. I want to avoid getting too geeky about this, but but the language really interests me. I read Peter Hessler Oracle Bones years ago and was just completely enchanted by his discovery of the Hanzi, of the Chinese characters and how they've changed. But what I want to ask you about, perhaps I think there's 2 questions in here. I took your translation and I opened Cleary and kind of looked at them side by side, and it's very, very interesting to do that. And I'm not a translator by any means at all, but the nuance and the subtlety and what can result in differences in meaning, maybe they're slight, is profound. It's really profound. In our Western languages, and I don't want to be trite here, but just as an example, I can say house, or I can say casa, or I can say maison.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty much one-to-one.
Mm-hmm.
These are pretty much literal equivalencies, if
Right.
but it's clearly not that way when you're looking at the Hansa or these characters, these ideograms that perhaps have shifted in meaning over time, and such that we come up with these either subtle or more dramatic differences in how that translates into English. I don't know if that's a coherent question or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that the different Chinese ideograms do have a bigger range of meaning, but that's not the big problem with Chinese. The big problem with Chinese is that the grammar is so empty. There's almost no grammar in Chinese. So how you, as a translator, how you reinvent it can change a lot, and it's more to do with grammar, and there's a lot of ambiguity in the grammar. But then there's also like with the Blue Cliff record and Between Mine and Cleary's, there's also the question of, do you two things. One is, do you understand the concepts? I don't think Cleary really understood them, especially the key concepts that I put in the back of the book, and I put in the back of a lot of my books, which are the key philosophical concepts that really describe the conceptual framework within which Chan and Taoism work. And if you don't get those, you don't get anything. And Cleary didn't know, other translators didn't really know those words. I've just watched it, and in the back of China Root, there's like 40 pages tracking those translation errors in other translations. So they saw these words and they simply didn't know what they meant philosophically. And they often used, these are big words like dark enigma, absence, presence, Tao, meaning way, and a bunch of others that I translate as existence tissue or occurrence. And I explain what those mean in those key term sections at the backs of books. Other translators have tended to translate them either a bunch of different ways, which is really confusing. They also often use these kind of grand sounding Western philosophical terms like ultimate reality with capital letters, or ultimate truth, or things like that, which are completely meaningless in English. And I think another difference is just that I really came to this as a literary translator, and I don't think I know any Zen translators that were that way. There really was the idea that translation was this kind of mechanical process, and I mean, you just, it's just a matter of moving words from Chinese to English, and it's not true. You have to do a lot more than that. And that's just, in a sense, that idea of translation, because I came at this from the world of contemporary poetry, and then translating ancient Chinese poets as a way of making contemporary poetry. So I really came to a translation as a literary art and part of a way of inventing a new literary tradition in English. So I think that helps a lot. So I really craft poems. I get what poems are supposed to do, and and Cleary doesn't understand how to make a poem, for starters. Sorry to sound arrogant. I'm not really arrogant. That's just how it is. So you read his translations. I mean, okay. And then the third thing that goes on is, in translating, people were convinced after D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts. I don't know. You go back to the beginning of Zen in America. One of the things that everybody loved was just this floating paradox and you read Watts and Suzuki, and it's just like they over and over and over, all they want is, they throw these meaning, like paradoxical little stories or whatever at you, and people love that. And so translators have read Chinese and translated, and if it doesn't make sense, they think that's what it's supposed to do. So they just left, so they didn't, but it's not true. It always makes sense in a way, in a kind of Chan way. And sentence by sentence, the actual sentences make sense. So, you know, I just fight with the sentence until I've made it make sense in Chinese and made sense in English. And then the paradox comes from the whole construct, not in each sentence. Sentences, every sentence in the Blue Cliff Record is coherent. It's the whole story or the whole poem where the sort of paradox and enigma comes, if it comes. And so for translators, that was the kind of a crutch. It was like, if you didn't get it, you just said, well, that's what Zen is, so it's okay.
Thank you for that.
End of long answer.
No, that's a great answer. And I promise not to go down a rabbit hole, but I might fall in it. When you just so everybody is tracking, when you say that Chinese is lacking grammar, what we're talking about, right, is there aren't any articles to speak of. We don't conjugate to speak of. Right. And there's a number of other things that are just, it actually makes.
So yeah, there's no grammar. It's sort of word order, and it's very nice because the word order is basically the same word order as English. You know, but say not the same word order as French, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's often no subject, there's often no verb, there's often no object. You have to fill those in from context. There are no articles. There aren't things telling you relations. Like you say in poetry, you have line A and you have line B, but you don't know the relation between them. Is it and? Is it but? Is it before and after? Is it, you don't know. You have to figure that out. There's no, verbs don't conjugate. You have no idea what the temporal situation is. And that's a whole philosophical thing that I talk about, because time does not, classical Chinese and Chan and Taoism don't work in linear time. They work in the more primordial, sort of Paleolithic, emergent time. That's a big story to talk about in places. And then there are other things, like you don't know if a word is plural or singular. Like if you might see a word that's mountain. First, it's a pictogram of 3 peaks. So it's pictographic. It's good. It's the immediate, it's an immediate image of reality. That's a huge difference. And then you don't know what this is. Is it a hill? Is it a high alpine peak? Is it 1? Is it 100? So there's this whole range of meaning. So that's where all the ambiguity comes from in the grammar. But the biggest thing is just all the empty space, all the stuff you have to fill in. Like I said, subjects, objects, verbs, relations. Yeah.
David, I promise I'll get you in a second, but I want to press my interrogation just a little further. So David, and I told you, when we were in the green room, I think I can read about maybe 10 or 20 characters perhaps, but so it sounds like what you're saying. I mean, the easy ones I know, Shan and Da and Ren and Zhang, the really easy ones. Those, because I'm simple, I tend to think of those as being kind of fixed, what they are. Shan is mountain, and Da is big, and Ren is person or people. Zhang is center or middle. But I guess what I'm hearing you say is it's not that simple, that there is nuance and variation among all of those.
I mean, I always say semantically, Chinese, a word in Chinese has a bigger field of action than in English in general. But again, the huge difference between Chinese and English, and the huge problem with difficulty in reading Chinese, is it's all the missing stuff. So my Chinese teachers back in the day called it a context dependent language. That is, you need context before you know what words mean often. It's true in spoken language when you're, well, that's another story. But like I said, you might not know what the subject is. The Chinese doesn't tell you what the subject is. Like Chinese poetry is almost always about a poet's immediate experience, but the poet almost never says I. You just assume if the word says, like look, pear, blossom, it's I looked at pear blossoms. But there's no, you wouldn't know that unless you know that that's how Chinese works. And then part of learning to read Chinese for the ancient Chinese, or for us, is learning how to fill in all the blank spaces. They're just, so I mean, it really is true that part of Chinese simply isn't written down. It's there. It's not like it's not real. It's not like it's not the language, but it's not written down.
It's more suggested or implied, or it's the context, the environment, the neighborhood.
Yeah. It's what I said. It's an empty space in the grammar. Like at the beginning of that little sentence, look, pear, blossom. At the beginning of that sentence, there's an empty space for English. There's an empty space, and in that empty space, we just fill in I. And then, of course, the fact that I is rarely used, think about that in terms of Chan, where it's all about dismantling the ego and the self, and sort of integrating, it's about empty mind. Well, in a sense, a Chinese poem or most Chan texts are always already enlightened, because there's an I there. Every time English sentences, every sentence we always have to put in the I in English. And every time you put the I in, it reinforces this kind of illusory self we have. In Chinese, at least in Chinese in classical Chinese, that was almost never there. If it was there, it was kind of interesting as different. They could do it. The words existed. They just didn't want to use them.
Oh, I see. David, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead and unmute.
Hi. First off, thanks for all that you've shared with us over the years in all the different forms. I would ask if you could just ask your editors to put an opinion instead of wage odds. But
what's the story behind that? Is that your question?
No. My question was, so it's clear that your take on Chan is firmly rooted in your understanding of Taoism. That's very clear. And I totally go along with that. That makes perfect sense to me, that it should be. I think that's appropriate. But then it leads to the question of, where did your understanding or your sense of Taoism really come from? You say that you don't have a lot of teachers. There's also a wide range of ways people have approached modern people have taken to try to understand Taoism. And I'm sure you're familiar with, because you even mentioned it, some of it. If my bad translation doesn't make sense, that's because they're all mystical, talking about some ethereal plane, versus like, I just don't understand, and what they're saying makes perfect sense because they live in the world and they're talking about direct human experiences. Mm-hmm. And then there's sort of theories of language, like Chad Hansen, for example, and then some of the arguments he's made about looking at it as you should start from it makes sense instead of start from it's a mystical otherworldly thing that just people can't understand nowadays. So how about you? Because this is so important to understand the way that you're interpreting the empty spaces in Chan poetry, in koans, and everything else, it's very obviously influenced by your understanding of Taoism. So if you could say a little bit more about your journey to reach your current understanding of Taoism and how that came to be. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, pinyin first. Yeah, because when I started translating, Wei Giles is what everyone used. One. Second, virtually all of the kind of literary translation from Chinese is in Wei Giles because it predated that. That was the transition when American scholars changed to pinyin for whatever reason. I don't know when that was, around 2000 sometime. By then there was a huge body of work. I had pretty substantial, I don't know how many books. So it's like, why I'm not really going to turn my back on all that. I want this to be part of that literary tradition in English. So it's kind of like just a bad situation I have no way of solving. And I don't want to change to pinyin, because then I'm like writing off and then all the names that I used in the first half of my career are different from the names in the second half of my career, because often someone's name in pinyin and Wei Giles, you wouldn't know it was the same person. They're so different. So that's just a crappy situation. Sorry. I have no solution. So let's see, what can I say about that? So the thing is, Taoism and Chan are the conceptual framework within which all of Chinese intellectual culture worked. That is, all the poets that I translated, painters, calligraphers. So I started translating poetry and slowly realized that there's this whole philosophical thing underpinning it. And I got kind of interested in that. So part of the answer to your question is just experience. Every time I translate someone, because of how I'm trying to reinvent their minds in English, I have to inhabit their minds in a pretty deep way. So I've done that with a bunch of poets who are essentially Taoist Chan masters. And then I went back and I translated the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi and those early classics and the I Ching. So I've translated all those early ones, which means inhabiting Laozi's mind and inhabiting Zhuangzi's mind. So I guess it's just experience. I mean, just like language learning, you learn that skill of filling in. You know, anybody in a classical Chinese language class is learning that. And it's not that hard. I don't know that understanding Chan and Taoism determines how you fill in the spaces, really. It's more about how you understand what's being said. Like you said, it all makes, sentence by sentence, it all makes sense, but the terminology,
But you'd agree it informs it. I mean, you've made that clear just in the way that you've written other works about just there's knowing, okay, emptiness, but then there's inhabiting and really feeling what emptiness is. And you would say that you've grown I would imagine, with experience, the way that you can contextualize things, because you just have a wider realm to draw on. I would kind of wonder if then potentially, since so much of the work is informed by the minds of people who have experienced these things deeply, if you would look back on the way that you translated or interpreted something earlier in your trajectory of life's experiences, and would revisit it, because now you're aware, he also knew this guy and they were also talking about this. They probably, had a cup of something under the moonlight and talked about it. And, if I'd have known that he knew him, then I might have thought about his way of thinking about it might have been differently, that kind of thing.
I actually did that. The first book I did was Du Fu, the greatest of Chinese poets.
Yeah.
And thinking just what you're thinking, I just redid that whole book and published it a couple of years ago. For exactly that reason, and mostly because I just at that point, well, one, I hadn't quite mastered translation to the point that I did a book or two later. But also I didn't understand Chan. I didn't understand Chan or Taoism. I mean, in a sense, in poetry, it isn't like it's explicitly talking about Taoist and Chan concepts, but they're under the surface. And yeah, how did I really figure all that stuff out? It was translating, and I was puzzled, but for a long time, by absence and presence. I couldn't figure out what that was, because nobody tells you in English. No one understands it. And it's only by reading those ancients that I figured it out. By reading them and also translating them and then starting to write about them. Because when you write about something, it kind of pushes you to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig.
Especially if you're going to try to write it in English, since you have to be more specific.
Yeah, right.
And
that's
then,
that's what I mean in my books of essays, like China Root.
Yeah.
And in introductions, they, doing that forces you, you can't write it if you don't understand it. And often, if you're a good writer, you don't really know what you're going to write, what you're writing about. I knew where I was going, but I didn't know the details of how I get there. That's the adventure. So anyway, yeah, it's all that. It's reading the ancients at a deep level. And then, yeah, I don't know. But you're right.
It seems
it took me a long time.
Yeah, well, because I mean, like, one time I translated something, I did Southern Hills because it sort of seemed nice. But then later I learned something. It's like, oh, that's South Mountain. He means South Mountain. Like, specifically, he means South Mountain. So I can't just call it the Southern Hills, even though it's perfectly legitimate. And that's one of those things where I would just wonder, the potential benefit of, I guess, having a teacher that you can interact with directly, who can through iteration, I can do it on my own, like by reading more things and translating and realize, oh, that should have been that. Whereas I could see how having someone who already knows that to be like, oh, did you think about that? Would be a benefit.
And you're also you're stuck with your teacher's small mind. Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things is that for those, like for South Mountain, I don't know, you're translating Tao Yunming, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, there are often commentaries. If you look at the Chinese texts, they're very strange because we're used to looking at a poem sort of by itself on a page, but in Chinese, the poem is often there's often commentary spliced right into the poem.
Literally between the lines.
Someone will tell you South Mountain is about this.
That's the stuff that I usually try to avoid reading, especially for translation, because I don't want to have it be too, like, maybe afterwards I'll go back and look at it. But
you read Chinese?
Some, ploddingly slow, and try to do translation in classical.
Also English, like there are English translations of scholarly books that would tell you that that's South Mountain and it comes from the Shurjing songs.
Yeah. I guess like you, I'd rather figure it out on my own through reading other things instead of being told it. But
no, I plunder everything. I want to know everything, but you get small answers like that from it, but you don't get big answers from those commentaries.
So would you say with Taoism, it's been from reading Taoist texts or from reading commentaries on Taoist texts that you've contributed a lot to your understanding of Taoism?
It's the originals. I haven't read commentaries, except there are some I don't know if any, in my book, The Way of Chan, which is an anthology of the major Tao, of the big Chan texts that that show what Chan was, which is very different from Zen. I translated them to show that, to kind of build out an original Chan tradition. Anyway, that has this one section, and those, it's the major philosophical tradition, or movement or school or whatever, that lasted, I don't know, a couple of 100 years or something. Anyway, that's a transition between Taoism and Chan. And in that transition, the key texts are sort of commentaries on Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi. So those I've read and translated, or chunks of them, big chunks of them, not the whole thing. Anyway, so then that's sort of an exception. That's because often commentaries function as primary texts and a way of making philosophy in the Chinese tradition.
Where could I find those?
Of the Blue Cliff Record, because that's that level that people call commentary, the poem. It's not really commentary, it's original Chan teaching.
A response rather than a commentary, yeah. Where would you say, where could I find the text you said that you've looked at you've translated the commentaries that were on the original ones? Like what would be an example of
that's my
it?
book, The Way of Chan.
And that, okay.
Yeah, and then that will tell, I think that should have a finding, that should tell you how to find it in Chinese, although that's pretty hard to find, that stuff.
And when they found the new bamboo strips from the other versions of like Tao Te Ching and stuff, does that affect you much, or you've already kind of?
No, I mean, no, because the Tao Te Ching that shaped Chinese culture and that shaped Chan is the one we know. So it's academically interesting that there were these other versions of it way back when, but those versions didn't build Chinese culture. It's the one we know that built Chinese culture. So in a sense, it doesn't matter to me. But also they're not a different philosophical world. Like, I don't know, I can't remember the bamboo strips. There have been a number of tomb discoveries of different versions of the Tao Te Ching, but they're not fundamentally different. They're the chapters are reorganized. There's one that's a lot shorter, that's like 30 chapters instead of 18. And that one was some teacher's little assemblage. So it could be that a teacher just pulled out some favorites and put them there.
Greatest hits.
Yeah. So I mean, they don't have any substantive difference, those other versions. They're interesting, and the most interesting thing is people have doubted that Lao Tzu was as old as the tradition says he was, or as early as the tradition says he was. And those tomb findings have pushed his dates back just about to the traditional date. So that's kind of nice. Anyway.
Well, thanks for chatting. I loved you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, David. Both Davids. And maybe we'll move on from Nanshan here to, we've got a few people with questions. Let's go Chloe and then Nikki. I think Nikki's still got her hand up, and then Greg. So Chloe, go ahead, please.
Hi, David. Thank you. I was wondering if you could read one of the Sangha cases out loud. Maybe one of your favorites, or one that, thank you.
Good idea, Chloe.
You know what maybe I'll do to make it even a little more interesting? So like I said, these Sangha cases were Snowshoe Mountain went back through the teaching records of some hundreds of years before him. I'm trying to think, maybe 400 years, from the 400 years before him. Just think about that time span. We look back at ancient China and this Chan stuff, and you think, oh, okay, well, 1100, 800, yeah, big deal. But 400 years, that's like us to Shakespeare, right? That's a long, long time. That's past Columbus. Anyway, so I thought maybe what I'll do is I'll read the original this is the book I was just talking about, The Way of Chan, the anthology. maybe I'll read the original story in that, and then I'll read the Sangha case, which is what Snowshoe Mountain did with the original story. All right. Okay. And actually, this is what you know, the person you know is Jiaozhou, which we were talking about beforehand in the so-called green room, right? Oh, no, it's not. It's Yunmen, Cloudgate Mountain. Oh, maybe I should talk about name, that I use names. But anyway, so here's the story in the original story. A monk asked, what is the small talk that surpasses Buddhas and transcends patriarchs? Gruel cake. Where's the connection? Asked the monk. Exactly. Where's the connection? Exclaimed Cloudgate. Then he continued, and notice this anti-teacher thing. Listen, you haven't understood anything. The moment you hear someone mention the mind of patriarchs, you start asking about small talk that surpasses Buddhas and transcends patriarchs. You're already inner pattern way itself. So why ask how to be a Buddha or patriarch? So he's saying those are philosophical terms that are explained in the key terms. Inner pattern, and way is that the Tao as in Taoism. But the point is, you're already enlightened. Why are you bothering about trying to be a Buddha or a patriarch? Okay, so that's the original. And here is what Snowshoe Mountain did to put it in his in the Blue Cliff record. It's number 77, and it's called Cloudgate, after Cloudgate Mountain, the master that we just heard. And that was in the teaching record of Cloudgate Mountain. So, okay. So the title of this number 77 is Cloudgate Gruel Cake. A monk asked Cloudgate Mountain, what is the small talk that surpasses Buddhas and transcends patriarchs? Gruel cake, replied Cloudgate. And that's the end. So you see, he just wants the thing itself. He's not going to explain anything. And then there's the Gotha, the little poem about it. So I'll just read that. I don't know if this will come across or not. Oh yeah, and again, it's, you know, the anti-teacher thing. It's trust yourself. The whole thing I was saying earlier. So this is a short poem. It's just 4 lines. Small talk that surpasses. There's no end of Chan pilgrims asking questions. It's a fault line gaping wide open. Can't you see? Look, Cloudgate stuffs it full of gruel cake, and they're still not settled. Even today, all beneath heaven reveres the fairy tales teachers tell. So again, it's just gruel cake. He doesn't want teachers. He doesn't want explanations. How's that, Chloe? Is that all right?
Great, thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the question, Chloe.
So I thought I would, just because it came up earlier and we passed over it once or twice, I translate all these names like Cloudgate Mountain. And that's because in ancient China, names meant something. That all the intellectuals took literary names for the meaning. So it was all about the meaning. And often the Chan teachers would live on monasteries in the mountains, and they would take the name of the mountain. So that's why this guy's name was Cloudgate Mountain. That was the name of the mountain where the monastery was. And often, like, to go back to the early Taoist, Zhuangzi, whose amazing book is just a bunch of stories, many of which sound just like these Sangha case stories with all these wild, crazy people. And he used names a lot as comedy, the meanings of names. And often in Chan texts, they're there for sort of funny effect. And so I translate them because it's this whole cultural texture that you miss if you just get this Chinese, the Chinese names, the Romanized Chinese names. So that's why that happens.
Thanks for that, David. Nikki, I don't see you, but I see that you've got your hand up. If you want to
Yes,
unmute, and then
good
Greg will go to you
afternoon.
after.
Most very briefly, many years ago, Tibetologist Matthew Kapstein told me about the scholarship of his wife, who's a German scholar of Taoism. There were Taoist texts, the name was crossed off, and a Zen person put in their own name. That's all I have to say.
I don't know what to do with that. I don't know
Nothing. I
anything
have
about
to
that.
go. I'm late. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks, Nikki. Greg, you want to go ahead and unmute? Thank you, Greg. You're still muted there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Now you got
Hi.
it. There you go.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not a scholar and I'm only a haphazard practitioner, but
It sounds like a good combination. It sounds like me.
I read a number of your books a few years ago and then sort of migrated into Zen.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been sitting for a long time before that, but I started studying Zen texts. So, and I'm trying to, it seems to me there is something that Buddhism contributes. I don't know if it contributed to Chan or it contributed to what, as if I understand you correctly, you're sort of saying it was the deviation of Zen from Chan, but somewhere along the line, something showed up in Zen that wasn't in Taoism. And maybe you can help me understand that. But what it seems to me to be is, from a Zen point of view, it's the notions of presence and absence would be critiqued, it seems to me, as reifications. Sort of not holding faith with the notion of dependent arising and the negation of intrinsic existence, emptiness. So there seems to be
that's not Chan, by the way.
I'm sorry,
that's Buddhism. That's not Chan. The negation of
intrinsic existence. Yeah,
of intrinsic existence. Chan is zero metaphysics, zero denial of reality. That's all there is. It's just this rivers and mountains.
But
Anyway,
there's so it's an argument between how would I put it? I mean, from the point of view of Zen, if I understand it correctly, Mahayana, rivers and mountains held to be intrinsically existing, held to be not dependently arisen, are reifications, are delusions.
Oh, I see.
But in Taoism, if I understand it correctly, which I know much less about, they're held to be fundamental, substantial realities. Absence is a place or a thing or a realm, existence tissue, as opposed to a concept that we superimpose on what we don't really and can't understand as suchness or emptiness.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. You were going right where I was. You're getting to what I said. Yeah. Well, let's see. I don't know where to go with that. Let's see. Yeah. And that's why there's been a lot of misunderstanding, I think, of Chan, and I think this misunderstanding is part of what how Zen sort of drifted away, and that is because that Buddhist idea, like when they say the world is empty, they really mean that this is just delusion and it doesn't really exist. But for Chan people, no, that's not they use the word, this is complicated. So people translate, like, this is one of the problems with Zen with English translations of old Chan texts, is they see Chan as Indian Buddhism, as a branch of Buddhism, and so they like read a lot of ideas like that into it. And that's a mistake. No, I think of Chan and ancient China as radical empiricists. It's just, there is nothing else. And the world isn't empty. It's not illusory. It's not delusion. It's not a construction of the mind. It's not any of that kind of stuff. And there's no metaphysics, no otherworldliness. When you die, you're dead. End of story. So yeah, I mean, what you're saying is true. I'm not sure what else to say about it.
Could I jump in?
Yeah, please.
You know, the notion of the world as an illusion, certainly appears in Zen texts that I've read.
It doesn't. Not in a context.
And it's also in Hinduism and so on. So
Yeah.
you can see the Indian roots of it. But maybe the Chan clarification of that was that it's not that the world doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist in the way that we apprehend it. We apprehend it as existing independently. It only exists as a network of relations, of dependent arisings. So it's not at its best, it's not a denial of the existence of a world, but it's the denial of the way we understand that existence.
Okay. Yeah, this is going kind of deep fast. Okay. Well, first, Chan was not adjusting Indian Buddhist kind of metaphysics like this. That never entered. The only thing Chan really got from Buddhism was a kind of institutional framework. Sorry. And kind of formalized meditation, like groups meditating and things like that. Sorry. But in terms of a philosophical framework, I don't think they got anything from Indian Buddhism. They weren't adjusting, so they weren't adjusting it. Okay, let me think. So I mean, Chan thinks as long as you're thinking about the world, you're getting it wrong. Yes. And the most fundamental teacher, I mean, in a sense, the deepest definition of Dharma is thusness, the sheer thusness of things outside of human concepts, right? And that you only have access to that, not through concepts, only in empty mind, the immediate empty mind experience of the world, of thusness. That's the only access to it. So you can't, as soon as you start explaining it, you've lost it, right? Because then it's, as you say, it's a construction of the world. And another way they talk, the Chan and Taoism talks about this, and this begins in the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching and runs all the way through Chan to the Blue Cliff Record and on, is the idea of kind of being more specific about that and saying, this is about the sort of Chan truth or awakening is wordless, outside of text, outside of words. The deepest level, what that's about is, if you look at reality, it is, if you imagine standing in a field close your eyes, forget everything you know, forget all the words, all the concepts, all your beliefs, forget everything, if that's possible, whole traditions, and open your eyes just to see if you want to know what reality is. Forget everything, then open your eyes, and what's in front of you. And what you see is, well, there's all this stuff. There's just this stuff. And there, why is there this stuff? I don't know, but there it is. That's the first thing you notice. Next thing you notice, if you look for for 5 seconds or 5 million years, is that stuff doesn't hold still. It's constantly changing. You know, you see clouds moving, you see wind coming and going, you see the trees get green and turn yellow and the leaves fall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You see mountain ranges build up and collapse if you're there long enough. But another thing that happens, and this is when you open your eyes, what you're seeing is this undifferentiated tissue. It's one undifferentiated tissue. Taoists talk about this, and Chan people talk about this all the time. It's only when we start naming things that it divides up into individual things. It's not like, okay, I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing trees, a field, and a shed. Okay, so if that's all there. Doesn't matter what I think about it. However, before we start naming it, it's just one tissue, right? In our experience and in and of itself. In and of itself, it's just one tissue of matter, of reality. But we come along with our words, and then I say tree, field, shed. Now I have 3 things. But before that, it's an undifferentiated tissue. And Lao Tzu, all the way back in the Tao Te Ching, talks about this. It's the undifferentiated block, you know. So that's a little bit of what Chan does. It's similar, and what Chan does, it's similar to what you're talking about with the sort of more traditional Indian Buddhism. That is reality. Reality, that, you know, how the relation of reality to our conceptualizing reality. Does that make any sense?
It does. Yes. Thank you.
And when I can't really go into this, but one of the big things that happened in the transition from and the building of Chan was, and the transit and the how Buddhism influenced Taoism to become Chan, is the word emptiness. And you brought up that in old Indian Buddhism, the Buddhism that came to China, emptiness, when you apply it to the world, is the idea that the world is empty, it's illusion. And then that word got translated into Chinese. See, a lot of Chan, when Buddhism moving into Chan, a lot of it had to do with mistranslation. Things are mistranslated through Taoist terminology. And this is one of them. The Sanskrit word gets for emptiness gets translated into the Chinese word that we translate as emptiness, but it has nothing to do with this kind of non-reality of things.
Right. It's not a nihilistic position. It's
a completely different idea of emptiness. Yeah. It's that undifferentiated reality that I was just talking about. That's what they mean, empty of discrete forms.
Yes.
Empty mind. It doesn't mean any of it's illusion. It just means it's thusness. It's there just outside of our grasp, but we can't experience it with empty mind. So that's just like, I talk about that in places in more detail, but that's just like a little very scratch the surface kind of thing.
But if I'm hearing you correctly, that awareness exists both in Taoism and in certain streams of Mahayana, Prajnaparamita.
No, I'm saying it's totally different. Taoism
is strictly empiricist.
Taoist is radical empiricism. Chan is radical empiricism. They have zero tolerance for metaphysics, for any idea that reality is illusion, all of that stuff.
Well, not that it's illusion, but that it's not the way we see. It's not divided up into things. Ultimately, it's not. Conventionally, it is. I mean, the notion of the two truths is where we get.
Yeah, that's there, and that's certainly there in Chan and Taoism. I'm not sure if it's there in old Buddhism, the Buddhism that came to China, or whatever of that sort of stream of Buddhism that influenced Zen later on in Japan. I'm not sure how that worked. That's a whole different world for me. I just do Chinese. So
just one more question, if you have a quick answer. How does Dogen figure into all of it? And what's your take on Dogen?
I don't know anything about Dogen. I just do Chinese. Okay, but I mean, the one thing about Dogen is he was trained in China. So he should have taken all this stuff back with him. And I expect he did. And I don't know, it would be a big scholarly project to try to figure out where in the migration did all of this earthy empiricism, this sort of deep female energy get lost. It's somewhere in Japan, and then in the transmigration from Japan to the US. But I think most of it happened in Japan because D.T. Suzuki knew little, if anything, about any of this. But he knew Zen inside out. That is Japanese Zen. So why didn't he know any of this? And I don't know the answer to that. Because so I can't say anything about Dogen. I would think this stuff was not completely absent in Dogen, but I don't know. Like I said, he and all of the original Japanese Zen people were trained in Japan. I mean, in China.
In China, yeah.
I mean, they were the people who brought it back as a cultural tradition and started building off of it in Japan. But think about how Japanese. This is maybe a gross caricature, I don't know. But think about how Japanese, when it brought Chinese stuff, it tended to like turn it into this elegant minimalism. I think that's what happened to all the ideas of Chan. And you can see it in what happened to Chinese architecture, what happened to Chinese poetry, what was a 4 and 8 line poem in China. That poetic form kind of like got distilled down into haiku, a much more distilled and into just more or less pure image, whereas in China it was image mingling with sort of poetic ideas and poetic using the images. So there is this sense that Japan's somehow, again, this is maybe cultural caricature, but Japan's sort of deep cultural bent is this elegant, refined minimalism, and it brought that to everything Chinese everything that came to Japan from China. You can see it in the calligraphic tradition for sure. That's what they did to calligraphy. Anyway, all of that's pretty, I don't know, esoteric maybe.
Thanks.
Greg, thank you for the great questions, Greg. Thank you. We're down to just a couple of minutes left. If I might, David, if I can ask you a final question, and you may or may not have an answer to this, but with your new translation of Blue Cliff Record, and I said it before, but I'll say it again, and in the addition of these great source materials or the indexes and the sections at the end that are so helpful. How would you hope people use your book?
I think reading it as a literary text, not thinking, oh, I'm going to take this to my teacher and have my teacher explain it to me. once you read the key terms in the back, the introduction and the key terms in the back, so you know that sort of cosmological, ontological framework within which everything happens, and the idea that this is all about your own your own inherent enlightenment. You don't need, it's not out there somewhere, and that's the main theme going through this. That you just read this, because literary texts, if you think about what a literary text does, if you're reading a poem or a novel or story or whatever, they are shaping experience to get experience, to give you an experience, right? You read a poem and you come at it with an immediate direct experience. And that's what these do. You know, you don't, like we were talking earlier with the woman, I don't know her name, I can't remember, the high school teacher. You don't need someone, you need to know things, you need to, the more you read, the better you can read, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, you need some framework to get started, but they're trying to shape an experience right there, right now, as you read it. They're not there to take to your teacher and have your teacher explain it to you. And that's what I think. That's how people should use it. They should just pick it up like they would pick up a book of poems, with the idea that each poem is an experience that's going to somehow maybe change how I feel or how I think or how I see, some new little wrinkle in things, and start reading. Read the introduction, read the key terms, and then you have the framework, and then just start reading. Or even better yet, read My China Root, because that really explains the whole Chan, how Chan works at a deep level. And then you just start reading. You read the story and you get what's happening. You read the poem, you get what's happening. It's all pretty straightforward, I think.
Great.
That's
Thank
what
you.
I hope it's easy. I don't think it's hard. I don't think you need years and years and years of study of teachers, and you just need a book or two.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thanks
Bruce,
for having
Bruce, I see your hand. If it's really, really quick, we're just seconds from being out of time.
It is quick. David, this sounds like no one else can digest your food.
No one else can digest my food?
That's right.
Well, maybe. I don't know.
No one else can digest your food, meaning it's always our own
Oh,
process.
I see what you're saying. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Thank you.
I
Yeah,
like
good.
that.
That's a good way of saying it. Thank you.
Maybe that's a good way for us to close today. So
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for sticking with us for the hour and a half. I hope this was helpful. And David, remind us, and I should know, but I've got the digital copy. Are you in print now? Is it available now out
Yes,
commercially?
it's available. It came
Okay.
out 2 months ago.
Okay, I didn't recall. And in that case, we should have it in the store on the Zen Peacemakers website, or I'm sure everywhere else you can get this as well. Highly recommended. And David, most sincerely, thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts and really helping us dive down deep into this topic.
Thank you.